Let's do the finally full book tag. I was tagged by Liam at Liam's Lyceum. I'll tag him in the description. He's got a channel a lot like mine in terms of classic sci-fi and fantasy. So if you like that, I recommend you check him out. This is, I say the finally fall as if this was the start of September and I lived in America. It's autumn and it's the end of autumn in Britain. But I got tagged. It's a chance to talk about books. So we're going to do it. The first question, this is 10 questions. I will put them in the description. The first is, in fall, the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. So, Liza Lochlamora, I wouldn't say in most respects I was blown away by. I'm not a massive partisan. I liked it, I enjoyed most of it. But the thing I thought that was really strong about the Liza Lochlamora was the setting. The city of Caymore was vivid, living. It was really another character in the story, and one which... backdrop matters, scenery matters in books, and it made the character stakes and the plot stakes a lot more important. So I really enjoyed that. And yeah, very vivid setting. Nature is beautiful but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. I think Liam gave the same answer. He actually gave this answer to about 6 questions, but Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien is... Obviously, it's a beautifully written book. He has very, very good prose style. But it's about, ultimately, it's about many things. But it's significantly about decline and death. It's about the sort of ways in which good things go from the world and people fight to preserve what there is of them. And yeah, I think that's very autumnal, I suppose. It certainly deals with heavy topics. We go in grief, but not despair, though, as Aragorn says. The third question is, fall is back to school season. Share a non-fiction book that taught you something new. Can I just say, I get that fall is a really obvious name, the leaves are falling, but we don't call summer, bright. It's shine season. We don't call spring wet. At least where I am, it's very wet. I feel we've got to, deal with this naming convention once and for all, American friends. You've got to change the rest of the seasons as well. So a book that taught me something. I read a lot of non-fiction, so I could name a lot of things, but here's a book it's not very long, and I think it's of general interest. Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. There's 2 sequels. Basically, a rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything. Obviously, that's an over-the-top name, but what do estate agents and the Ku Klux Klan have in common? Why do drug dealers live with their mothers? How can your name affect how well you do in life? Basically, big thing Levitt is into is, okay, so it's really hard to answer macroeconomic questions. We just seem to be guessing a lot of the time. We observe a few general rules, but mostly economics at the macro level is a shot in the dark. So what happens if you go to microeconomics and look at how very specific closed systems or semi-closed systems, small systems work? Can you measure what inputs and outputs do there? And it's really interesting just being able to say, do crack dealers get rich is the study behind that question about do they live with their mother, and things like that. So yeah, I recommend that. I think that's got a general kind of interest which I think people might enjoy. In order to keep warm, it's good to spend some time with the people we love. Name a fictional family, household or friend group that you'd like to be a part of. This is such a bad question, isn't it? Because virtually all the books most of us read, we don't want to be friends with those people, even if they're great people. I love the Fellowship of the Ring, I'd love to be part of the Fellowship of the Ring. Wrong. No, I want to end up in Shelob's lair with Sam and Frodo. No, we might like the characters, but the groups that adventure around in the books we read, I don't think most of us want to be part of. Most of us want to end up with Sam and Rosie as their neighbours, don't we? At the end of Lord of the Rings, not do the rest of the stuff. But there are a few exceptions, and one that I think counts because it's a bit like a normal job. Guards, the City Guard, the City Watch in Terry Pratchett's Guards series. From, say, the point that Carrot joins them and Vimes decides that he's going to try to solve crimes. And from there, the idea of a tight-knit family who is out to do good in a way that actually people sometimes do. If nothing else, we often have community groups, don't we? We don't usually have half imaginary dragons being summoned. We don't usually have conspiracies by, spoiler, I wouldn't say, but conspiracies by people to overthrow the city. We don't normally have time travel involving serial killers, but I mean, maybe you do. But nonetheless, I think the Guards are a family I think I could cope being part of without feeling like this was a very, very bad life decision. The colourful leaves are piling up in the ground show us a pile of fall-coloured spines. No. Fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book where somebody is telling a story. Gene Wolfe, Book of the New Sun, Volume 1, Shadow and Claw. I read this in the earlier autumn. I'm probably going to continue with Book 3, which is Volume 1, Part 1, in December. And this is one of my books of the year. Highly recommend it, highly recommend it. In this, Severian, a torturer's apprentice, is writing the history of how he seemingly came to some position of power or influence or security after having been exiled, after having had lots of things happen. And the big thing here is that Severian both claims to have an excellent memory and also admits to insanity. And the book is wonderful. This is 2 books essentially. In fact, that is the actual dividing line, at 300 pages each. Neither is particularly long in that sense, but there is so much going on. There is so much mystery and confusion and beauty and character interaction that's really effective and beautiful. And the way that Severian tells the story differs at different times in terms of how lucid he seems to be over it. It's a really interesting story where there is a storyteller. The nights are getting darker. Share a dark, creepy read. I've read a few kind of creepy books. I don't massively read creepy books, but I enjoyed the Dark is Rising cycle or sequence this year, which has a couple of those books. Even though they're technically middle grade to early YA, a couple of those books are really quite creepy without relying heavily on violence or horror per se, horror tropes, but just have a low level existential anxiety running through them. But I'm going to pick Lord of the Hollow Dark. I'd say, it says on the back, an uncanny story of adventure and mystery, a journey of grace through eternal darkness. I would not recommend this as your first Russell Kirk book. Russell Kirk, the cultural critic, famous ghost story writer. People like Madeleine L'Engle and Ray Bradbury thought he was the best of their generation. So I wouldn't recommend it as your first Kirk book. I'd recommend the short stories and Ancestral Shadows, many of which are available online. But this is the culmination of his fiction, his fictional universe, and it has some just quite hard and disturbing bits. But it also, it never kind of gives in to that despair. So though it is dark and creepy, undeniably, it is also, as it says, shot through with grace. The days are getting colder. Name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. I don't read loads of short, heartwarming things. I do have a choice, but a sort of runner-up might be something like picking an Agatha Christie book, for instance. But After the Funeral is a perfect example of what I'm about to say, which is that normally they're not heartwarming. Sometimes, I say that, she does have, in many of her books, there is some degree of heartwarming conclusion in a way that you might be surprised from a murder mystery. And there's a generally comforting tone to many of them, even though they involve murder. You know, we call them cosy murder mysteries for a reason. There's a certain air of understanding and familiarity, which is quite comforting. And yeah, they have some happy conclusions, but they're not always like that. And I wouldn't ever say they were heartwarming, really. Comforting perhaps, but not heartwarming. So I've chosen for a short read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. This edition of it is 171 pages with illustrations. So it's a short book. It is technically Hugo length for a novel, not a novella, but only barely. So many people now would call it a novella. Most adults could read this in a single sitting. And I mean, most people know about The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, don't they? But I think there's a greater coherence to the Narnia books, both internally and in the series, and people usually give credit for. Read Planet Narnia for that. And certainly listening to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe at the moment in the car with the kids, you can see, one, how compelling it is, how sometimes worrying and scary it is, but also just how kind of well done it is. And it's certainly The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, maybe more than any of them, is obviously heartwarming. It obviously has heartwarming elements to it that I think could cheer most people up. So that's what I'd give for that. Question 9, fall returns every year. Name an old classic you'd like to return to soon. Well, I could say Lord of the Rings again. I think Liam did. As I say, he answered it for about 15 of these questions. He answered Lord of the Rings. But though I am going to reread that next year, I do have another book related to that, which I would like to reread, which is The Silmarillion, which is an old favourite. I think I've read it twice, possibly, or 1.5 times. It depends exactly what I've read. I'm trying to think. I think I have read the Quenta, which is the big story of the early years of Middle Earth. I think I've read the main book in this twice, and I love it. I think it's underrated. I think people, because it's written in a different style and it's not intending to be a novel in the way that we understand it, people understandably end up saying, oh, I didn't like that as much as I thought I would. I think, again, expectations matter. And if you go in thinking, I'm reading a sort of medieval legendarium, then you'll come away with a greater appreciation of it. And it has some really beautiful, moving parts. I think I've got one of the expanded lays. I've got Turin, and I'd probably like to get the others. But this on its own, is, as a relatively short book, I guess. I mean, it must be 200 pages or something, or 220 pages. 35, yeah, 222 pages in my edition for the Quenta Silmarillion. It's not that long, and I've reread The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings relatively recently, albeit last decade, so I'd like to reread this to kind of finish my big Tolkien reread. Finally, fall is the perfect time for cosy reading nights. Share your favourite cosy reading accessories. I don't know if I have many cosy reading accessories other than sometimes a blanket, but something I do sometimes like having when I'm reading is good whiskey. This is single malt Penderyn Legend. That's their kind of basic signature single malt Scotch whiskey, but it's actually from Wales, so it's single malt Welsh whiskey. And I was bought that by one of my D&D players. I usually have a couple of bottles of single malt around, and it's, it really can be. I mean, that's a particularly sweet and warming and pleasant dram, and you can get a massive variety of styles. But yeah, I think that's a good cozy autumnal reading accessory. I'm not going to tag anyone in this because there are 4 days left of autumn, but feel free to tag yourself, and if you do tag yourself after seeing my video, please tell me. I'd love to watch your video, or feel free to use it for next year. It's also fine if you do it in like the middle of December, because who's going to complain? Anyway, those are my answers. You could also tell me what yours are in the comments. Till next time.